Okay, I have started recording and I've started the YouTube live stream as well. So, Orpita, just let me know when you have started our YouTube live stream so that we can just officially start.
We're live.
We're live? Okay. Should we start? Yeah, okay. All right. So, hello, everyone, and a very, very warm welcome to all of you who have come to attend our two-day Aklisa Symposium. I'm Titash. I'm a PhD student at the University of Chicago, and I'm also a co-founder of the Association for Children's Literature in South Asia, or ACLISA. The lineup of papers over these next 2 days is absolutely excellent. And as someone who was initially a bit skeptical about organizing a panel around this rather niche area of study, I am overwhelmed and thrilled to know that so many people are thinking along these lines. I can't wait to engage with the work of all of the participants and to have an interesting and productive discussion with all of you. But before that, I'll go over some of the housekeeping rules, and I'll also tell you the story behind this symposium. Regarding the housekeeping rules, I would just request the speakers to speak slowly and clearly, because we have speakers from all over the world, many of whose first language isn't English. The live caption will be enabled, and if anyone wishes to disable or enable it personally, they can do so, but from our end, we will enable it. Everybody is requested to be respectful and polite. Hate speech and rudeness will not be tolerated. If you're not speakers, then please keep your video and audio off so that we save some bandwidth. And every panel will be recorded. So anyone who wishes to not be recorded, please switch off your video. Okay. With that, I would officially open the symposium. But let me tell you the story behind how we came to be here in Zoom. As all the speakers already know, this was conceptualized as a panel for the American Comparative Literature Association conference, which is, by the way, going on right now just a few streets away from where I physically am in Chicago. The panel was accepted, but given the large number of panelists who needed to secure a visa to travel, we requested that a hybrid model be allowed for our panel. But ACLA refused to accommodate this request 3 years into a pandemic. And so here we are. I wish to thank first and foremost my ACLISA teammates, Honorima, Orpita, Ritvika, and Ahona, for agreeing, no questions asked, to hold this symposium online through the ACLISA platform so that it can be as accessible as possible to all the panelists, and then for working behind the scenes to make this happen. I also want to extend my gratitude to the panelists for agreeing to present their work on the ACLISA platform. My thanks also to our moderators for their support and hard work. Regarding how I came to organize or conceptualize the theme of the panel, let me share my screen because I want to start with an image, a very telling image. Is my screen visible?
Yes.
Okay. A few months back, while reading up on one of the largest running national franchises of children's literature in independent India, the Amar Chitra Katha comic books, I came across this. This is from a website called Desi Toys, the online version of a toy shop based in Thane, Maharashtra, claiming to sell at pretty high prices, quote unquote, authentic Indian toys. If you see the product package that caught my attention, what I've screenshot, the screenshot of which I've put up on my screen, this is the description page of an old board game, the Pachisi, which has an elevated role in the epic Mahabharata, or at least in its many later day pop culture versions. But what interested me was how, for this product, they had a tie-up with the official Amar Chitra Katha publications, and they were selling the Mahabharata-related comic books from SEK along with the board game. For those uninitiated to SEK, these comic books were founded, edited by Anant Pai in 1967, at a time when the Phantom comics were topping the comic book charts in India. Pai realized the popularity of the comic form and he decided to appropriate it for his pedagogical project. He chose popular stories and characters from Hindu mythology and translated them into comic form, and then he approached schools, libraries, and educational boards for state sponsorship, claiming to bring back Indian children to their roots through a cool new book format. The SEK quickly grew to be a household name among independent India's first generation of children and teens, and then the diaspora. In fact, these books have been credited with crafting a new middle class for whom the idea of nation and national pride were deeply related to the nostalgia for a majoritarian Hindu past. However, it does not take an expert to see that in this product, neither the Pachisi board game nor the SEK comic book sold along with them say anything significant about the cultural history of the subcontinent in the 9th, 8th centuries BC, which is when the events of the epic are supposed to have taken place. Nor do they say anything substantial about the textual history of the original epic. What they do, however, is to create a narrative and material correlation between text and toy that again and again cites a particular nostalgia. Children's literature and material cultures of childhood have always enjoyed a long-standing relationship. In Anglocentric contexts, it is well studied how toymakers and children's book editors worked hand in hand during the golden age of children's literature to construct a joint children's market for books and toys. However, even though playing with its various aesthetic, pedagogic, material, and cultural meanings constitutes an important element of South Asian children's book cultures as well, this phenomena has remained rather understudied in the academy. To begin with, one can think of how Lockean ideas of playful education seeped into the Indian market for children's books and textbooks, not just books for pleasure reading, but also textbooks in the 20th century, and propelled editors, writers, publishers, and illustrators to create entertaining educational books. One can also think of various ways in which games and puzzles were included within children's periodicals, which turned the book into a plaything. Besides, if we trace the history of different magazines, at least the popular ones, we see that the subscription numbers often depended on puzzle or quiz competitions and award distributions organized by the publishers of the magazines. Beyond the intended pedagogical objectives focused on developing particular skill sets, play and playthings are significant instruments through which children are subtly conditioned into their social worlds. As the various advertisements of toys and toy companies in the paratext of the books and magazines suggest. Coupled with the narrative of the books in which they are embedded, they script physical and social behaviors in children, to borrow from Robin Bernstein's concept of scriptive things. Literary depictions of dolls, board games, school sports, and pretend plays, for example, skirt understandings of imperialism and indigeneity, Western rationalism, and folk fetishization, and help to propagate gender, caste, class, and ethnicity stereotypes. However, to read play and playthings in children's literature simply from a didactic perspective is to limit the multiple meanings and possibilities of playing. Child readers, as agential beings, are hardly passive recipients of play and other playthings, and the social meanings they carry. Playing, with its emphasis on performance and creativity, could definitely be a tool by which children resist adult-imposed social and cultural structures. Playing, especially forms like pretend play, um, uh, have 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 been incorporated into children's literature to show how children negotiate with the different structures that are imposed on them. Playing as a part of linguistic acrobatics and wordplay has been, as part of children's literature, end up carrying different aesthetic and political meanings for different age groups of readers. Lastly, play, especially physical play and outdoor sports, is an important site of conversation about different kinds of bodies and their abilities. With all these questions, problems, and discussion points to chew on, let me formally open the symposium. I'm greatly looking forward to engaging with you and learning from you all. With that, I think we can directly begin our first panel, which is to be moderated by Ohona. So over to you, Ohana.
Hello, am I audible and visible?
Yes. Yes.
Hi, I'm Ahona. I'll quickly introduce myself and then ask our first speaker to introduce them. And after that, I'll just repeat the housekeeping rules once again. I'm Ahona. I am currently doing my PhD from the University of Chicago. I'm interested in girlhood and broadly on South Asian children's literature and the representations of girlhood therein. Okay, so the first speaker for our panel, for our roundtable on play and playthings is Athira Mohan, and she's presenting her paper titled Toys in Malayalam Children's Literature, the Case of Caste and Imperialism. Athira, would you like to introduce yourself quickly?
Hello, everyone. My name is Athira Mohan, and I just finished with my PhD on children's literature of Canada and India, and the nexus with colonialism and how it affected the indigenous children's literature of these two countries. So my presentation for today is on how a nexus of caste and imperialism affected Malayalam children's literature and how it is reflected, making a comparative analysis between two different short story collections from Malayalam children's literature. So meanwhile, I'll be sharing my screen now.
Let us know if you can't find the share screen option.
Yeah.
I'll just quickly go through the housekeeping rules as you try to pull up the screen. So like Titash mentioned, we have speakers from all over the world, many of whose first language isn't English. So we would like to request the delegates and presenters to speak slowly and clearly so as to make the conference accessible to others. The live caption will be enabled. If anyone wishes to disable or enable it personally, can do so, but on our end, we will enable it. A soft reminder through reactions or direct messages in chat will be given at the 9-minute mark for every presentation. Everybody is requested to be respectful and polite. Hate speech and rudeness will not be tolerated and will result in immediate removal. We would like to remind all attendees that if they are not speakers, they must keep their videos and audios off. Also, the recording, it's being recorded. Every panel is being recorded, and if anyone does not wish to be recorded, they can keep their videos off. The chat will be open throughout for questions, but we will take up the questions only after the presentation is done. All right, Athira, you can go on now.
Sure. I hope my screen is visible now.
Yeah, it is. We can see your screen.
All right. The title of my paper is Toys in Malayalam Children's Literature, the Case of Caste and Imperialism. The beginning of my paper, I would like to begin where the particular point which Titus mentioned in her introduction, toys being used as ideological instruments. and how it was not a feature that characterized Indian subcontinent or the entire South Asia before imperialism, and how that changed the country and the production of children's literature and the representation of toys in children's literature post-imperialism. Yes. In the present age, one can spot a constant cultural anxiety around the ethics of toys or the question of political correctness in toys. Conversations are created on the need for toys to be inclusive and multicultural. However, most of these conversations are seldom intersectional, cutting through the questions of agency and privilege. Children's toys share the ideological function of children's literature in them being used by children, but chosen and manufactured by adults. Very often, toys are used as devices through which gender as a construct and traditional gender roles are socialized. Studies have shown that children of a certain age start exhibiting preferences for sex-type toys as a response to the parental reaction to sex-type play. We often see parents being very excited about their sons, male offsprings using cars, or female offsprings using Barbie dolls, and the parental reaction that such playtimes elicit. Toys are not alien to the Indian topography, as puppets have been a central part of puppetry shows, which functioned as a central source of entertainment in the ancient days. Gender segregation in games cannot be said to have been an introduction of colonialism either, as efforts to condition girl children into mimicking their mothers' lifestyles were prevalent during the 10th and 12th centuries through Patukali. It's a predecessor of today's modern kitchen sets. India also had a rich history of utilizing board games that were not age restricted in nature, and as most of you might be knowing, Snake and Ladder and all such board games originated in India. Having said that, a vehement puritanical stress on the usefulness of games and literature was more or less absent in India. Toys were understood to have been used as a form of entertainment, and how children amused themselves was rarely considered to be an ideological exercise. The singular anxiety was about the concept of pollution, which was given aggregate stress. Many board games that existed in India from ancient times were used by people without age demarcations. Children did use toys such as wooden dolls in humanoid forms through which they developed perceptions about the external world. Make-believe scenes and enacting selected dramatic episodes have always been at the center of childhood play, but imperialism did alter the existing conditions to a considerable extent. All right, so yes, coming to this particular point, Philip Aries wrote a book called Centuries of Childhood, in which he argues that the concept of childhood was pretty non-existent prior to the 17th century. And while he's drawing the history or historiography of children's childhood and children's literature, he's mainly talking about the West, and how prior to 17th century, there was not a concept of childhood in the West. Mainly because of different reasons, such as infant mortality, and how post 17th century, the nexus of the society was more towards the individual, more than about the collective. So because of these reasons, children started getting more attention, and adults realized that the kind of literature that they read and the kind of toys that they play with do have an influence on them. And for the same reason, children's toys and children's literature began to be used in such a way to promote adult wants or adult political or ideological exercises. So, yes, as Titus said in the beginning of the symposium, Lockean and John Locke's and Rousseau's theories did contribute to the development of toys and devices that aid learning in Western world. And during those times, chapbooks or the children's books came along with balls and similar toys, which were mainly used to promote, or these toys were mainly used for a didactic purpose, to promote critical thinking or to promote a certain ideological thinking. So that is the major difference between how the concept of a toy was conceived in the West and in the Orient part of the world. So, so I have a small example to share here. There's this particular game called Geographic Recreation, A Voyage Around the Habitable Globe, which was created by John Harris. It's a board game, which is popular among children, showcases on its cover the four corners of the world, with Europe placed at the top. He compares British and French eating habits in the work, by which he manages to privilege one country over the other. So in the board game, if the dice falls on France, the player loses a point. And if the dice falls on Britain, the player gains a point. And similarly, board games and such toys meant for children were used extensively to promote nationalism, patriotism, and similar ideas. So the short story collections that I've taken for comparative reading, one is Mithai Podi, which can be loosely translated as Bag of Sweets, by an author called Sumangala, and Kootu Kooduna Kadagal by K.R. Renukumar. These are the two story collections that I've taken. And in this particular short story collection, we have a story called Neelimayuda Kadha, or the story of Neelima. It's a story narrated by a doll. And the expensive status of this doll is due to the site of production and the physical attributes of this doll and the experiences she undergoes. All right. In Neelimeda Kadha, the reader is introduced to a story which is narrated by a doll named Neelima, who is given anthropomorphic attributes such as physical and emotional feelings. This is quite similar to the ones written in the same vein by British authors such as Enid Blyton, whose toy stories are famous with children across many nationalities. The doll in this story is a product of globalization, as is evidenced from the excerpt below. This is translated by myself. Neelima does not know the origins of her name. However, she does not think she was given the name by the Japanese factory worker who molded her golden-skinned body, or the American lady who crafted her hair from thin nylon threads. After all, hers is an Indian name. She must have been named by the Bengali tailor who stitched her clothes, or the Odia girl who had carved her pearl necklace, unquote. Here, the very identity of this doll is multinational and therefore valuable. She's envious of the other toys in the shop who are locally made and hence cheap, and thus are purchased by children who take them to loving homes. The descriptions of the cheap toys remain as conclusive evidence of the local global binary and the reflection of their worth. I quote, "Lucky, a doll made of plastic, a blue wooden Krishna with a flute, a clay figurine of a sari-clad milkmaid," unquote. The costumes, the material of their making, and their colors and the location of their production are some factors which render them cheap, but also make them accessible to a variety of children from different social classes. However, the worth of Neelima renders it accessible only to a select few. Eventually, her turn comes when she's selected by Jayanti, an 8-year-old girl who takes her to her home, where she's loved and admired by everyone and coveted by Jayanti's friends. The figure of the doll, including her golden skin, silky hair, and garments of superior quality, are certain features that set her asunder from other toys at the store. Similarly, these features of the doll are attributional. By attributional feature, I mean that they place the status, or they place the honor Jayanti in an elevated social location compared to her friends. This is relational transfer of worth, often a common sight in capitalist society where a person's car, house, or such symbols of wealth and status give them a coded meaning. This aspect is also quite aspirational, as a generation of non-white girls have aspired to look like their dolls, have desired their physical properties, and this has been proven to create an inferiority complex in them. Gardner Murphy, in his work, Personality, a Biosocial Approach to Origins and Structure, points to identification as an important feature of the social development of a child. During the developmental stages of a child, they look for visual markers for identification. This was clearly illustrated by the famous doll test, which was conducted by Kenneth and Mamie Clark in the 1940s, where a group of white and non-white children were given a set of dolls, similar in all respects except for color. Most children, including the non-white, attributed positive characteristics to the white dolls, whereas negative values were attributed to the non-white. Yes, a disparity of gender also comes into play in the approaches of Jayanti and her brother to the doll. While Jayanti mollycoddles her and gives her love, her brother routinely breaks his toy cars open and wreaks havoc on his belongings. This disparity in behavior is indicative of a social conditioning brought up by their respective environments in the children. As children, the girl is encouraged to take care of her and nurture her dolls, to play imaginary scenarios of playing mother to her dolls, while the boy is encouraged to play with cars, and his brutality in handling his toys is not only forgiven, but is considered to be a characteristic trait of his gender. Fortune is reversed for the doll when an uncle presents Jayanti with an American-made doll, which is mechanized to walk and talk in English. Nilima turns into a neglected item in the household, covered in grime and cobwebs, and her silk dress eaten by moths. A friend of Jayanti called Manjula spots the doll and asks her permission to take her home. Thus adopted by a person of a different social class, the doll is eventually rescued from neglect and she's taken to a loving home. The story is precipiced on a pedagogical intention to drive home the message or to not to waste one's resources, as there are less privileged people on the earth. The entire practice of attributing anthropomorphic characteristics to toys render them human-like, not just in terms of emotions, but also in terms of social stratification. Not even once in the story, the child characters are seen to be indulging in outdoor games. The physical location of the story is mostly indoors. And whenever, if at all the characters go outside, it's always in a car. There is no mingling of socially stratified bodies, but a demarcation of domestic spaces that voids the possibility of pollution. In contrast to this, we have the other short story collection that I've taken. It's called Kootu Kudana Kadagal, or Tales of Camaraderie, written by M.R. Renukumar. This has the entire collection revolving around the experiences of the subaltern and how their lives are intricately tied with the environment. The child protagonist of the stories belong to the lower section of the society, which is conveyed through the food they eat, through the lives they lead, but most importantly, through their interactions with nature. Their vacations are spent in participating in water games, watching snake boat races, and befriending new people across different social occasions. There's this particular story in this collection that I would like to talk about. It's called Mean Kormbelumai Chicken, or A Boy with the Catch of Fish. This particular story recounts the experience of a child protagonist meeting with a stranger boy and hoping to befriend him. The author carefully etches out the social backdrop in this story as well, subtly revealed through the experiences narrated by the boy's parents of having had to work hard in the fields as children and abused and denied education. The following passage is translated from the original source for better comprehension, translation being mine. Mother used to narrate her old stories of how she had to stop studying after 4th grade and how she had to work in the fields from the age of 12. During those times, children were paid half of what adults got, and they used to bunk work and instead roamed around, snacking on lily seeds. Father was beaten once by his teacher for being late to school. He was beaten till his back was broken. Having thrown an ant nest on his teacher, he left the school on that day. He used to roam around looking for odd jobs, drinking water out of wells, and eating mangoes and jackfruits. Here we see that the lives of the children are intricately tied to nature, which is seldom observed in the other collection. The toys with which they play are also sourced from nature, like watches made from palm fronds and vehicles fashioned out of old cycle tires. Their toys do not attribute values to the children, nor are they aspirational. Additionally, the intermingling of children of both genders is another feature of the stories where nature acts as a leveling ground. So by attempting the comparative study of these two collections, one can understand how imperialism worked in India through an excess of caste. Although an ideological instruction through toys was largely the contribution of imperialism, playtime was already marked with an anxiety of pollution even before the advent of imperialist constructions. However, it has definitely contributed to a rapid bifurcation in terms of gender socialization and creating aspirational tendencies in children. I've come to an end of my presentation, and thank you.
Thank you so much, Athera. We will quickly move on to the second paper that we have for this panel. It's titled Depiction of the Child's Play in Rabindranath Tagore's Children's Literature by Shubhayan Basu. Shubhayan is not able to be here with us in person for this panel, but we have one of our co-founders reading it out. I'll quickly introduce Shubhayan anyway, and then Ritika can take up from there. Shubhayan Basu is an independent researcher who received his master's degree in English from Jadavpur University in 2022. His interests include children's literature, postcolonialism, and spatial theory. Yes, Ritika, you can take it up from here.
Okay, so I'm just reading. Am I audible?
Yeah, you are.
Okay, awesome. I'm just reading on Shubhayan's behalf. So I can't take questions on his behalf because I have no idea what question, what he had prepared or anything. So I'm just reading this out. Nature and play and playing with nature in Tagore's works for children. Kala or play is a universal or absolutely primary category of life that appears in myriad forms in Rabindranath Tagore's works for children. It is sometimes physical, sometimes imaginative, and even cosmic. This paper will first investigate the relationship between children's play and nature, as well as how the child's interaction with toys sustains this necessary relationship. Tagore once stated that children's books are only partially understood because they contain a surplus. My task in this paper will also be to show how Tagore's efforts to guide adults in cultivating playful selves, which can then help them rebuild their relationship with nature, contribute to at least a portion of this surplus. In the context of this paper, we are looking at a romantic poet's conception of the child, which is predicated on the assumption that the young ones have an innate affinity with nature and a love of the outdoors, the origins of which he explained in an essay as follows. I quote, "There is nothing as old as a child. Adults have been deeply influenced by time, place, and culture, but the child has remained the same for the last 100,000 years. Eternal and unchanging, the child is born every day among us in human form. Yet he remains just as fresh, sweet, and innocent as on the first day. They are nature's creations. Adults, in contrast, are to a great extent the product of their own doings." Most of Tagore's writings for children were published in either the late 19th century or in the early half of the 20th century. In a short story such as Bolai, 1928, he captured the child's propensity to be at one with nature through the young protagonist, who is in awe of the vegetal life surrounding him, as in his own, I quote, "Nature somehow the fundamental notes of plants and trees sounded the loudest." He was at his happiest when he was playing in the lap of nature. The sense of belonging in nature can also be traced in the story Shubho, in which a mute girl discovers that the only people who understand and accept her despite her disability are the two cows, Shorboshi and Ponguli. The child's curiosity about the natural world, especially in his poems, would be wildly colored by imagination, as their minds would occasionally transport them to a far-off fairy tale meadow known as Tepantor, grant the non-living world vitality, or occasionally make them aspire to become their non-human other. Tagore did not shy away from depicting how physical separation from nature is detrimental to children's well being and causes a great deal of suffering in works such as Chuti and the Post Office. In Akash, 1937, the speaker presents another case of deprivation from nature and the intense yearning that results from it, claiming that the sky has beckoned to him since childhood, but his days would pass by from the confines of his room, save for the times when, I quote, "I would sneak up to the rooftop, steal a sky full of golden relief, and drown my wistful eyes in the blue ombre." Tagore identified a few adversaries of the child, including Macaulayism, Hindu orthodoxy, and the contemporary adult mode of being that was influenced by it. He considered them to be woefully inadequate since they both failed to nurture a connection with nature and instead took the opportunity away in cases where such a bond was organically developing. Tagore, who had himself left school only a few months after being admitted, was against didactic and moralizing education. He drew clear parallels between the school and other total institutions of modern society, emphasizing their similar penal characteristics. It is possible that Tagore felt that the opportunity to play was also lacking in the system of education, since, as Shivaji Bandhopadhyay points out, he sought to cultivate a line of whimsy that would ensure joyful learning. He left his mark at the elementary level with his Bengali primer Shohojpat, which liberated children from the dichotomies of good and evil and allowed their imaginations to run wild. A great part of Tagore's educational project also consisted of setting up a school in Shantiniketan, where students received a broad and balanced curriculum while surrounded by nature. Recalling her own experience, Mahashita Devi wrote, "We were taught in our school at Shantiniketan that every animal, every cat, every bird had a right to live. From childhood, we were taught to care for nature, not to break a single leaf or flower from a tree." Tagore wrote that the religious ideal of India that he believed in was mukti, or freedom, and that this could only be attained by, I quote, by making provision for students to live in intimate touch with nature, daily to grow in an atmosphere of service offered to all creatures, tending trees, feeding birds and animals, learning to feel the immense mystery of the soil and water and air. Thus, Shantiniketan ensured the emergence of human beings who sought freedom in the wholeness of being, grounded in the fundamental concept of play as a means of creatively living on earth. It appeared as a material manifestation of the ideal playground for the childly imagination, which knew no bounds and freely fantasized about becoming a hawker, a gardener, a night guard, and so on. Tagore was predisposed to staging antagonisms between the child and the adult, or more specifically for our purposes, the playful child and the non ludic adult, particularly in their interactions with playthings. If education, as controlled by adults, is geared towards depriving children of their freedom and kinship with nature, then children's playthings, particularly toys, which are commonly understood as traditional and cultural tools made by adults to foster development, should do the same. The French thinker Roland Barthes wrote, "Toys always mean something, and this something is always entirely socialized, was constituted by the myths or the techniques of modern adult life." And this, according to him, had a detrimental side. The child, long quote, the child can only identify himself as owner, as user, never as creator. He does not invent the world, he uses it. If there are prepared for him actions without adventure, without wonder, without joy. While he was referring to French commercial toys, which mostly consisted of miniaturized adult objects, Walter Benjamin, who placed an emphasis on the act of playing over the plaything, had a following to say. Long quote, "Children are irresistibly drawn by the detritus generated by building, gardening, housework, tailoring, or carpentry. In using these things, they do not so much imitate the works of adults as bring together, in an artifact produced in play, materials of widely different kinds in a new intuitive relationship. Children thus produce their own small world of things within the greater one." Giorgio Agamben also wrote on the matter, stating that children, humanity's little scrap dealers, will deal with whatever junk comes their way, and supported the subversive potentiality in children's play, since children will destroy the signifiers of the past through their play. The image of children playing with scraps sourced from nature recurs in multiple of Tagore's poems, for it is the case with a poem like On the Seashore, where children build their houses with sand and they play with empty shells. With withered leaves, they weave their boats and smilingly float them on the vast deep. Children have their play on the seashore of worlds. Children gather pebbles and scatter them again. Moreover, I contend that regardless of whether toys were designed to encourage children become subjects of the adult world or not, it would have made no difference to Tagore. The Tagorean child has the power to upset any developmental teleology. The the destructive potential of the child's play figures, somewhat literally, and is likened to Shiva's Tandav in the titular poem from the 1913 collection, Shishu Bholanath. At every step of thy wild dance, things totter and tumble. Thy gatherings are scattered, and a whirlwind of destruction spreads the sky of thy trampled toys in the spreads the dust of thy trampled toys in the sky. From desolation to desolation, thy world finds its release. The stream of thy play ever flows through the burst bond of thy playthings. Reveling in penury, thou buildest thy creation with trifles, in the next moment to forget it, for a mere caprice. It is worth noting that most of the play in Tagore's writings for children takes place largely in the space between mother and child, often in a monologic fashion, because in the real world, as Shivaji Bandyopadhyay suggests, the scope for play is limited, above all by the patriarchal family. But the patriarchal order is not only opposed to children's play, but also to adults, or mostly men, developing a playful sense of self, and is content to produce dull jacks. In Choto Boro, 1909, it is clear that even the child associates becoming an adult like his father with the renunciation of play. Just to divert a second, uh, just thinking of Calvin and Hobbes and Calvin mimicking his father as a sense of play. Anyhow, back to the paper. Opposed to the plastic child of Tagore's poetic imagination, the adults being ossified, which is why in part 2 of Shohujpat, the child asks quite innocently yet tellingly, why do fathers go to offices and not to foreign lands? In Putul Bhanga, 1922, when the tutor smashes the child's doll for not focusing on studies, Tagore's inquisitive child is intrigued by their tutor's irreverence towards their toy and asks their mother if their tutor does not have toys at home, and whether the tutor would have appreciated it if someone had destroyed their toy. In some texts, adults recognize the loss of their creative fecundity, which is revealed to them through their inability to play, as in the poem Playthings, 1913. Child, how happy you are sitting in the dust, playing with a broken twig all the morning. I smile at your play with that little bit of broken twig. I am busy with my accounts, adding up figures by the hour. Perhaps you glance at me and think, what a stupid game you spoil your morning with. Child, I have not forgotten the art of being absorbed in sticks and mud pies. I seek out costly playthings and gather lumps of gold and silver. With whatever you find, you create your glad games. I spend both my time and my strength over things I never can obtain. In my frail canoe, I struggle to cross the sea of desire and forget that I too am playing a game. The sense of deprivation expressed in this poem is that of being deprived of the virtual space of childhood or the space of child's play, voiced in a Wordsworthian fashion. The adult speaker appears to be weary of being caught up in the materialist world. Even when they realize they're playing, that they're taking part in a game of life, it does not feel like play to them. It is possible that his play has become colonized by society, losing its emotional impact and meaning and becoming impersonal. The same lament is also present in The Gift, 1913, in which the elderly narrator admits that the younger generations will not have time for them, and all the older generation can do is cherish in their hearts the childhood that they will never have again. What a grumpy old ma- what the grumpy old men in the above cited poems miss, and Agamben puts it quite simply, is that humans can keep on inventing games, and it is possible to play with what once pertained to the practical economic sphere. Play theorists like Johann Huizinga, Roger Calois, and Donald Winnicott have all observed that playing seems to create a space that is difficult to access, but not one that adults are forbidden from. And Tagore himself has indicated that there is always the possibility of engaged play. All that seems to be required is to make a simple deal, as seen in the last bargain. A child sat playing with shells. He raised his head and seemed to know me, and said, I hire you with nothing. From thenceforward, that bargain struck in child's play made me a free man. The narrator finds freedom through the child's play, where nothing is given, but there is an exchange nonetheless. This for Tagore, play is both non-teleological and instrumental in gaining freedom and getting closer to nature. And can I just add a comment about how maybe uh, marginalized or underprivileged children in the urban poor, they create and make their own games with the scraps. The scrap dealer comment got me thinking about that. Whereas, commercial games are not exactly available to them, commercial toys are not available to them, so they create their own play with scraps.
That's true. And even in the previous paper, I think there was that relationship of different children from different backgrounds and how they treat toys and how they value toys. So I think, yeah, that is really sinking. So should we move on to the questions now? I think if people from the audience have questions, please feel free to drop them in the chat box. And I myself will, I loved both the papers, but I have a lot of questions for Athera. So I'm just going to read them out. And then you can take a moment to think about it. And we can also see what questions we get in the meanwhile. Okay, so the first question that I was thinking of as you were reading your paper was,